Well, hello everyone. This is a bit of a different video than what I imagine you'd expect from me, but as the title and thumbnail show, I will be talking about the Nintendo Switch 2 and pretty much doing a pseudo review of it. This is completely unscripted from me, I just want to say that first and foremost. So I have a couple notes down and that's the extent of it, but like a regular review, I'm just going to be talking about what I like, what I don't like, and yeah, let's just cut the crap and get on with it, really. Just before we begin, I would like to say I'm in no way endorsed or sponsored by Nintendo. I think it's a bit ridiculous that I have to clarify this, but just because I have positive thoughts about the system does not mean I'm a paid shill or whatever people on TikTok or whatever platform will have you think. I have some positive things to say about the Switch 2, I have some negative things to say about it. Just because it might lean a bit more positive does not mean I'm sponsored. So I just thought I'd clear that up first. And besides, how is a channel with 1.5k subs getting sponsored by Nintendo? Okay, so firstly, let's talk about the specs of the system. Now, there's two ways that people seem to be viewing these. It's either you view it in the context of the system, or you view it on paper in comparison to the PS5 and Xbox Series X. And when you do that, obviously, it's not going to be as good. I think that's a given, because Nintendo have never focused on specs since really the GameCube and GBA era. Since then, they've been always focused on games first, hardware second. But in regards to hardware, I think the Switch 2 is pretty alright. Not top of the line like Lenovo Go or ROG Ally, but better than the Steam Deck. And don't take that as a diss to the Steam Deck, because I love it, but just in terms of raw horsepower, this thing is better, aside from having 4 GB less RAM, I believe. The CPU is a custom chip from NVIDIA, and GPU and stuff like that also is, I believe. It has NVIDIA architecture from 2021, if I remember correctly. So it's a bit outdated, just like the Switch one, but not majorly so. And as the recent third-party ports have shown, which we will get into in a little bit, that's not a bad thing, because it can support fairly recent games. But outside of stuff that's hidden on the inside and what you can see externally, the 1080p LCD screen is a treat. I really like the screen of the Switch 2. It's much better than my LCD Steam Deck screen, which is 800p and with a less color range, but then again you'd expect that from slightly newer hardware, of course. It's also better than the Switch OLED screen, which I don't think is too surprising resolution-wise, but in terms of colors, I saw people were a bit concerned that the OLED would have better colors than this LCD, but those concerns can be put to rest, because I personally am of the belief that this looks better in that regard. It can do up to, I believe, upscaled 4K output. It can natively do 1440p, but I'm not entirely sure if it can do 4K native. It can, it's capable, but I don't know if it's going to be always 4K native or upscaled. That's the thing that I mean by that. It also, that's from the dock anyways, handheld, it's locked to 1080p. You also have Ethernet built in, like the Switch OLED, and I think, like I said, overall, pretty alright spec-wise, in my opinion. I figured let's just talk about controllers quickly, because they kind of fall under specs. I can't speak about the Pro Controller 2 on my behalf anyways, because I've only heard about it through others, because I don't actually own one. But as for the Joy-Con 2, they're okay, I think. They're scaled up to fit the 8-inch screen of the Switch 2, which I forgot to mention earlier. So you get bigger home buttons, bigger trigger buttons, bigger face buttons, bigger sticks, all of that sort. And it's nicer in the hand than the Switch 1 Joy-Cons, and it feels of a more premium build quality. But that being said, there are some flaws in the base design, because for most of it, it's remained the same as the Switch 1, aside from being a larger, thing. The first issue I have is that the D-pad is still 4 buttons, 4 arrow buttons, instead of being a true D-pad, which is a bummer. It's not as bad, obviously, because of the bigger arrow buttons, but at the same time, a true D-pad just feels much nicer, and having to resort to buying a Pro Controller for that is still a bit disappointing. The second issue I have is that because of the Switch 2 Joy-Con grip still existing, it prevents the Joy-Con themselves from having much grip. And while this isn't an issue if you use the grip or you play in TV mode, it becomes an issue when you're playing in handheld mode, which I will build back to later on in the video. And as for the third issue, stick drift isn't fully fixed. If you see in the commercials for the Switch 2, there are like blue and red parts of the sticks, which are dust covers in actuality. They prevent dirt and debris getting in there, and while I'm sure that will prevent some cases of stick drift from occurring, the core design under the hood is the exact same, aside from having newer and bigger sticks. So while I don't think it will be as much of an issue because of the dust covers at the very least, it'd be a bit disingenuous for me to at least not mention it in this video, I think. On the other hand, I've only heard really positive things about the Pro Controller 2. Now, like I said, while I don't own one, I think I can at least give my input on this regard of it. I'm not sure, despite the positives, that the upgrade is fully worth it from the Switch 1 Pro Controller as of now, unless your Switch 1 Pro Controller is completely unusable. As for the Switch 2 version, the D-pad is of a much higher quality, apparently. The sticks are also feel much nicer, and the grip is more based off the GameCube controller, which is only a positive because that grip on that controller is really nice. And obviously you get the perks of the chat button and the back buttons of the controller, but like I said before, it's not too different on a base level to the Switch 1 Pro Controller, which is why I don't think many people will be picking one up immediately, and the price really doesn't help things either, which we will talk about now. As for pricing, this has been arguably the biggest controversy of the Switch 2 in every regard, with the console, the games, the accessories, anything. And what are my thoughts on it? Well, I think the console itself is fairly priced. For the specs you get in it, I don't think it's an unfair price to have it at. I don't like the rise of game prices, and I think the accessories are a bit too high, although I can understand it more than the games at the very least. For $450 or £400, not counting the Mario Kart bundle, I think the console offers good enough specs to warrant the price for what you're getting as like a handheld with these kind of, chips and things like that, and also getting a dock which can do 4K and it has its own fan and stuff. Games being $80 or £75 as we have in the UK is problematic though. Mario Kart World, which we will get to shortly, is not worth the asking price, but then again, I don't think any game is at this point in time, and I really hope we don't see this become a common trend within games, because I thought 70 was pushing it. To see, 80 now is pretty disappointing in my opinion. And as I mentioned for accessories, I understand it because you got the tech in there, like with the Switch 2 Joy-Cons, the tech in there is like costly to manufacture in comparison to a game cartridge, but like it's still a bit pricey, and as a result I don't know how many people on launch at least are going to buy extra stuff on top of their console bundle unless they've already done it. It's not going to be as many as you'd imagine with like the Switch 1. I think it'll be more relegated to stuff you get down the line in comparison, which I know a lot of people did with Switch 1 anyways, but I don't know, I just feel that system had more people buying accessories at the start because of how it worked and things like that. As for the handheld and docked experience, let's just get docked out of the way. This feels almost identical to the Switch 1 aside from the fact that obviously you get perks like 4K and, stuff along those lines. And that's not a bad thing by any means, because Switch 1 in docked was pretty good, just now we've got a more powerful version of it with some upgrades, and that's alright with me. Switch 2 in handheld is where I'm a bit more disappointed, because unfortunately the comfort is better because of the bigger form factor of the Switch 2, but still not in regards to grips on the Joy-Cons as I was mentioning earlier. So you still have this pretty flat system which can become a bit, not like fully painful, but a bit of an ache. I think it's a bit like you get a bit of ache from using it for too long, at least I did anyways. So while this is not the greatest, I also don't see it being improved unfortunately, so you kind of got to accept it for what it is. And while we're talking about the handheld experience, the battery life on this device is probably the biggest flaw that I have seen with it, and the biggest one that I agree with. Now, this is not to say that this is a Switch 2 exclusive thing. Almost every high-end handheld PC or high-end handheld device has these battery life issues in regards to gaming systems anyway. I'm not talking about like laptops and stuff, but the Steam Deck has about the same battery life expectancy. I can only imagine the ROG Ally and the Lenovo Go have the same, if not a bit less, because of how expensive they are and how much more expensive tech they have in them. But that doesn't mean it's a good thing. Mario Kart World, I believe, averages 2 to 2.5 hours of battery life, which is pretty poor. I understand better tech leads to, higher power draw, which equals to more battery being consumed, but at the same time, it's still something you can critique, and this is something I also imagine will improve as the generation goes along, just like how it did for Switch 1, but that doesn't mean it isn't a problem now, seeing as there are currently no iterations of the Switch 2. So I can only hope it gets better, but as for the Switch 2 V1, battery life I think is the biggest issue so far, easily. Now as for games, I think the Switch 2 launch library is pretty solid, all things considered. Not in regards to first party quantity, but in terms of quality overall, I think it's pretty good, but that's mostly being carried by the third parties. In regards to what I've played so far, I've only played Mario Kart World and the Street Fighter 6 Switch 2 edition, and that is what I will be speaking on behalf of, because I obviously do not have much experience, directly. It's easier to talk about a controller than a version of a game that you haven't even tried. So I get that's maybe a bit hypocritical, but oh well. Anyways, Mario Kart World, pretty great. I don't know if it's my favourite Mario Kart game. I don't think it is. But I'd say it's at least cracking my top 3, which is a good sign. There are some issues I do have with it in terms of quality of life stuff being missing from 8, as well as the free roam having a bit of a lack of incentive. And this is something I'll probably get more in depth on Backlogged if you follow me on there, or if you even know about it at all. So I won't try and conflate this video here, but just generally, it's a pretty good game, could just do with some quality of life additions to really reach its full potential. And as for Street Fighter 6, I'm not going to speak on how good that game is itself, because I think people know what they think of Street Fighter 6 at this point as a game. But in terms of the Switch 2 port, from what I can tell, it's pretty good. It runs at, I believe, 1440p, and apparently it also does 120 Hz, which was news to me today when I found out, because I don't know if they mentioned that in the marketing, but I found it out on TikTok and I thought that it was pretty cool and worth mentioning. So would I say it's a worthwhile port? Yes. Would I buy it if you have it on another system, unless you want to play it portably? I don't know. I'd say it's a pretty good port though, from what I can tell. It's not downscaled too much. They're probably using the 8th gen version as a basis. I'd be surprised if they wasn't, and then having some enhancements like 120 Hz and stuff like that. So as for game quality, haven't played much, but the games I've played are good, and the launch library is pretty solid, aside from the fact that Mario Kart World and the Switch 2 Welcome Tour are the only true new first-party experiences, because you get Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom Switch 2 edition, but they're not new, and the fact that Welcome Tour costs any money at all is a bit of a joke. It should really be built into the console. So when you look at it like that, you've only got Mario Kart World, and Mario Kart World is great, but I think ideally you'd at least have another game to go along with such a big launch. And maybe this is straw manning, because other Nintendo systems have done this before, but just ideally Donkey Kong or something would have been able to have made the launch, I think, and it would have just solidified it a bit better. But otherwise, games so far are pretty good, and they're taking good advantage of the hardware from what I can tell, but I don't own stuff like Cyberpunk, so I can't speak on it, so my apologies in that regard. Another thing about games is game keycards and their existence. Now, I'm not a fan of it, but I appreciate Nintendo being honest about it. Game keycards, if you don't know already, are pretty much digital games on a physical cartridge, because they just give you the download key to a game and it pulls it from the eShop and downloads it for your system, while still being a physical thing. Now, you can at least resell these games and reuse them, but at the same time, I don't like how physical media is slowly going away. But then again, like I said, Nintendo's being honest, Microsoft and Sony have had this for a little while. If you look at Doom the Dark Ages, that game came with 80 megabytes on disc, hardly anything. Just, it downloads it all pretty much from the PSN store, at least on PS5 anyways. It's probably the same on Xbox, but I can't say. But, back to the main point, I think this is because of Express SD being such a new medium that 64 gigabyte carts alone are expensive to print. And even like less, like 32 gigs might be more. So they want to give the option of developers at least having a physical version, which I appreciate. But even if the cost of manufacturing these Express SD cartridges gets cheaper, I imagine many developers will still cop out like game keycard physical versions just to save them money, which is a shame because we could see like many less actual physical releases on this device in comparison to the Switch 1. I guess it fixes like code in a box, but Split Fiction launched as a code in a box game, so it's not even fully rectified that issue. And just as for the kind of end of this video, as I'm starting to run out of things to really talk about, or stuff that's coming to my head as I'm reading off of these notes, I don't know how misinformation about this console spreads so vast and so wide. Some of it isn't that bad because it's just simple half-truths or stuff that's not been fully understood, but at the same time, some of this stuff is genuinely absurd. Like I saw people saying, your device will get bricked if you use third-party accessories, which is absolutely insane. No, it won't. There's also some stuff that's unverified, like apparently the Switch 2 can brick itself by detecting a higher voltage, which I don't know if that's true. It's kind of unverified. I'm to believe that it's not true based on how much misinfo is going around about the system anyway, so you never know, it could be. That one's up in the air as far as I'm aware at the moment. But then also like the Switch 2 being bricked, like if you mod it, this is stuff that Microsoft and Sony have had in their EU LAs for ages now, and that's not me trying to justify Nintendo doing it, it's just more of an industry standard. And most of the time, the bricking is at the fault of you if you brick your modded system. If Sony or Microsoft or Nintendo do anything, it's just probably going to be a system ban to stop you online. Obviously, they could change it and Nintendo do start physically bricking systems, but there'll be such a big backlash to that that I don't think at least Sony or Microsoft will be involved, and it might teach Nintendo a lesson, but who knows, that's yet to be seen, obviously. That's about all I have to say about the Switch 2. Overall, I would recommend it as a device. I think it's a good device, but like a lot of systems, maybe wait out until there's more software and some of the misinfo is clarified as true or false. Because while I'm very happy with this, I'm sure some people who pre-ordered it aren't. And to be fair, there is a pretty limited lack of software, so until you get more, maybe wait it out, because I don't know if you're going to get an emulator on this thing for a little while. Definitely not as soon as you did for the Switch 1, that's for sure. I know it's maybe a bit of a cop-out answer to say the console's good but wait for more software, but that's just genuinely how I feel. As a system rating, I'd give it like a 7 or 8 out of 10. And hopefully the Switch 2 improves over time, and hopefully it doesn't flop as well, because it's a bit of a shame when consoles do. Just for some clarification in regards to video production, apologies that this video is exclusively using stock footage. I just have no way of recording Nintendo Switch 2 footage like by myself, so I kind of have no other choice in that regard. All the gameplay, of course, will be credited on the side and in the description below. And as for regular viewers, don't expect this to become the norm. It's just, I just got this idea in my head and I asked the Discord server if they wanted to see it. Link to that is in the channel bio, by the way. And the majority of them said they wanted to see this, so why not? Anyways, that's all I have to say for now. So yeah, I guess that's about it. See you guys.